Hi, it's Llarold, and Blizzard just dropped the patch notes for patch 11.1, Undermined. Those development notes are available now, and so we're going to take a look at them. They are not actually going to have the PTR available until next year, as the very first line says, but this is just simply the patch notes for the update so we can kind of read them and give some feedback, and so that's what this video is going to be about. So apologies for it being visually kind of boring, but I don't have anything fun or interesting to put on the screen, or I would do that. So it's a new patch. We're going to get the Undermine as kind of a big new area. I think that sounds pretty cool. I always did like the Goblin starting area. At least I have fond memories of it. I haven't gone back there in a while, but I did like the idea of like a big Goblin city, and that's pretty cool. There will be some reputation guys in here, and don't really know a lot about this yet, but yeah, as they say, your experience will change depending on which cartels you ally with. So maybe you'll get a bit of a different experience from character to character. That's kind of fun. And then there's also a new car called Drive. And it basically is something I've been predicting since kind of, I think, patch 9.1, a little bit into Dragonflight. Like, we're going to get essentially dragon riding skills on a ground mount. Now, I'm a little apprehensive, a little afraid that they're going to make it so that there is some sort of, like, no flying forever kind of aura around the new area. That would not be great, but you know, I'm willing to be a little bit more, I'm willing to be proven wrong on this one a little bit more than I have been with the new island that they just put out in the 0.7 patch. That one was a little underwhelming, but this, I'm definitely on board with the idea of like a ground mount that you can drive around super fast and fun. And then there's going to be a new raid. It is, if I can count correctly, an 8-boss raid. It finishes up with Gallywix. Sounds pretty good. The 6th boss here, the One-Armed Bandit, that sort of sounds like a big single target boss fight, so that's like a pretty cool name. Definitely looking forward to testing that probably mid-January, late January, and then actually doing it whenever it comes out. My guess would be like late Feb, early March. I think that's a reasonable possibility. You know, we'll see, but I think that's probably what it is. And then we have good news as well on the new dungeon, Operation Floodgate. That is actually going to be in the next Mythic Plus season, and it's a 4-boss dungeon. So that's really good. Very glad that they didn't try to overbake it, overcook, and make a 5 or 6 boss dungeon out of this. Just very simple 4-boss dungeon. That's okay. I think everybody always prefers a 3-boss dungeon, nice and fast, but 4 will work. New PvP arena, PvP, whatever. All right, now let's get into some class changes, and I'm really just going to focus on tank stuff because, you know, that's kind of what people come here for. And so Death Knight is getting some decay changes, I think. Oh, actually, maybe not. Blood Decay is not getting any changes, actually. I think I might have misread this when I was first looking through, or maybe it's changed since I last refreshed. But Frost and Unholy are losing a bit of stamina, but it looks like Blood is actually getting no changes at all. And honestly, I was all prepared to say, like, you know, if you take a little bit away from Blood, it's kind of like taxing a billionaire. They'll scream and cry about it, but they'd never actually notice. But that's not even going to happen. So Blood is still incredibly strong. And, I guess buy stock in Blood DK. Start gearing yours up now if you want to tank next season, because they're still great. And it looks like they're going to continue to be great into the future. Demon Hunter's getting a little bit of a change here, and this is kind of this little change right here, making it so that Imprison breaks on a small damage threshold instead of any damage is something they're doing kind of across the board. All of the skills that would break on like 1 point of damage, Paralysis, Imprison, Shackle, Undead, all of those kind of mechanics will now break on a relatively small amount of damage instead of literally 1. I think that's a great change. Spectral Sight's getting redesigned. This is mostly irrelevant. But there is a little bit of a change here for Vengeance, where Demon Spikes is now just going to have a baseline of 8-second duration. I think that's a great change. Going to definitely make Vengeance a lot more consistently tanky in Mythic Plus. Very good. And then Cycle of Binding is going to only trigger from Sigil of Flame, but then be 5-second sigil cooldown across the board. I believe it's going to be all sigils, so that is the way that I'm reading it. So I think this still feels like a nerf. Not super in love with this, but I do really like the Demon Spike duration increase being 8 seconds instead of 6. I do think that helps, but not huge changes, right? So no changes for Blood, very small changes for Vengeance, nothing really all that huge going on there. Druid, and I do mean all Druids, are getting the change that they've been asking for since the Dragonflight beta, which is that their class tree is going to get a massive rework yet again. And I'm fingers crossed here, but it does seem like it's going to be good. We're going to have to actually look at it all in place, but there are a lot of new talents like Grievous Wounds, massive, just 10% damage increase to Rake, Rip, and Thrash. There are some talents like Circle of the Wild, 5% damage, and then 25% for Resto Druid. This really feels like a big boon for Resto Druid here. Again, Circle of the Heavens, 5% magic damage, 25 for Resto Druid, but then there's also some, just like taking some of the 2-point talents, like Instincts of the Claw, turning that into a 1-pointer. Lore of the Grove, once a 2-pointer, now gonna be a 1-pointer. So just some really good changes, but then they kind of get the Taxman in there a little bit, and they're kind of cutting down on rip damage, cutting down on ferocious bite damage, but then upping shred and swipe damage. So this feels like a kind of across the board buff to damage for Resto Druid, which that's not a bad thing. I think this will wind up being a pretty good buff for Bear Druid as well. Cat Druid, can't really tell. Might be more of a burst damage nerf and then kind of shifting some of that damage away. Might be net neutral for cats, not that I really care, but just like make them a little bit less evil in PvP. Honestly, that sounds fine. Druid of the Claw is getting its main skill, the Ravage proc, being reduced somewhat. That's a little bit of a single target nerf for Bear. And then there's a new talent for Bears, Ursol's Warding, and I can just kind of pull up a Bear talent tree here to show off where I think that's going to be. That would be in place of Layered Mane right here, because Layered Mane has been removed. So Ursol's Warding will give you magic damage reduction equal to 5/10% of your damage reduction from armor. So you cap at 85% if you're like 100 stacks of Iron Fur. Normally you're going to be at like 60 to 75% Fizz DR on most targets. So we're talking about, with 2 points, 6 to 8% magic damage reduction. That's bad. Scintillating Moonlight, by comparison, is 5% per point, and if you went into the Druid community and said like, oh, I'm gonna take Scintillating Moonlight, they would laugh at you, and that applies to physical and magic. So with that new talent here, Ursol's Warding only being magic damage and being even less, it is higher in the tree, but it still just really seems like it stinks. So I think this talent's going to need to be like doubled for it to have any real impact at all, maybe even need more than that. I like the concept though of getting some kind of magic damage reduction based on your armor. I think that concept is good, the tuning is just way off. Reinvigoration and Verdant Heart are kind of being moved around here. So Verdant Heart is this talent over here, 20% healing increase to healing taken while you have Frenzied Regen or Bark Scan active. That's just being made baseline for Bear Druid. That's good, it should be. Reinvigoration is this talent over here that gives you 20% Frenzied Regen cooldown. That is being reworked to make it so that Frenzied Regen heals for longer. You get quite a bit more healing out of it, and then you also get a free Rejuven regrowth on yourself for a lot of extra effectiveness. So they're making it so that instead of having Frenzied Regen much more available, much more often, it'll hit a lot harder. I understand why they're doing this. They feel that Bear Druid has healing available too often. I don't necessarily agree at all, but that is kind of what they feel like needs to be tweaked here, and it's not the worst change in the world. It is better than just a straight nerf. And then finally, speaking of straight nerfs, they are making Raise just replace Maul again. They're going back to that. And they're also nerfing the damage of Maul and Raise. They're also buffing the damage of Mangle, but that's kind of less important than the Maul and Raise nerf. That definitely hurts Bear's overall damage. And also just like Raise, at least as it's currently tuned, is a single target damage loss. If you spec into Raise and then use that instead of Maul, you lose damage, and that seems like the direction that they're going back to. So I feel like Raise might be dead again. It seems like it's already kind of dead right now, as I understand. Not that I've been playing much Bear Druid in the current state of Mythic Plus, but yeah, this doesn't really make me all that enthusiastic about wanting to, and that's kind of a bummer because I think that the class tree changes seem pretty good, but the Bear Druid specific changes, I'm not really all that stoked about. All right, so then we have Hunter changes. I'm not really commenting on the content of them because I don't know and I don't care, but I did count the number of words in the Hunter section in a Google Doc, and it is around 3,000. It was 13 pages. Copying it into a Google Doc, not formatting it correctly, of course, but massive amount of Hunter changes. And now I say all of that so that I could set up going to the Brewmaster Monk section, and it's 0 words. Let's move on to Paladin. So Paladin's getting some very, very small changes here. Seal of the Crusader healing reduced by 50%. This is a very small healing effect anyway, so really not doing much. Lightforge Blessing, similarly, not a huge healing effect. Really not happening, not a lot happening with the kind of splash free healing that you get as a prop pally under a normal talent setup, but now that's even smaller. That's fine. I will note that Blinding Light not breaking immediately on non-holy damage is actually a nice little change. It will make CC a little bit more effective. And then the only real change happening with Prot is that as a Templar, if you take Undisputed Ruling, which of course you're going to do, it is a much better talent now. This was like a conspicuously bad talent. It's this talent down here that casts Judgment on a bunch of targets nearby. I always thought this talent was really, really bad. And now it makes it so that you get a free Shield of the Righteous and you get a free Consecration cast, as well as that 12% haste. It's better. This feels like something that should have been in from kind of the first round of feedback in the beta, but at least it's in now. And then the real big thing that I want to emphasize in all the class changes is Protection Warrior. And they start off by saying that they feel warriors are in a good place overall, but there are a few places they'd like to make improvements to each spec and to the class as a whole. This all sounds great. Warrior survivability has been a weak point. They're really just talking about DPS warrior, I would say, but sure, whatever. So they are making some changes to the class tree, kind of shifting deck chairs around on the Titanic a little bit, making reinforced plates be a 2-point talent that combines endurance training and reinforced plates to function together, then moving some other stuff around, converting overwhelming rage into a 1-point talent, and notably they're making one-handed weapon specialization be a 2-point talent, kind of making it a little bit more difficult to get all the points that you want at the very bottom of the tree, and kind of nerfing some damage out of Thunderous Words as well. Probably not going to be taking that going forward. And then we scroll all the way down to the Massacre. Developers notes: Protection Warriors are currently flooded with rage, which undermines rotational defensive decision making and encourages constant dumping of rage into Ignore Pain to maximize effectiveness, so we're going to nerf you violently. And that's exactly what's happening. Chance to reset Shield Slam from Devastator and Strategist has been reduced from 30% to 20%, so you're going to get a lot fewer Shield Slam resets. 2/3 as many as you did before. Impenetrable Wall will also no longer give you an extra 5 rage on Shield Slam, so that's going to be a pretty substantial reduction in rage. Booming Voice is going to no longer generate 30 rage, it's going to be only 20. Or Demoralizing Shout, thanks to Booming Voice. Champion's Bulwark no longer causes Shield Charge to generate rage. Blood Surge now only generates 3 rage when deep wounds procs occur instead of 5. Violent Outburst only increases the amount of rage that you get from your next Shield Slam or Thunderclap by 50% instead of 100%. And so all of this is going to have a cumulative effect of just napkin math, not really putting a lot of thought into it. I think cutting your rage by about 35%, which feels really, really bad. And there is absolutely no compensation for that in the form of anger management, giving you any sort of extra cooldown reduction on Avatar or anything like that, or even on Shield Wall. They are cutting the base Shield Wall cooldown by 30 seconds. I don't think that's enough to compensate for all of these nerfs, and so the class is going to feel a lot slower. They're not doing anything to make Revenge procs be more often, or make Revenge hit harder, or cost less, or do anything to make Revenge feel better. Not doing anything to make Shield Block be cheaper. They're just simply making it so that you have way less rage to spend on Ignore Pain, so there's going to be Ignore Pain gaps. And what they're doing to compensate for all of this is giving 30% more damage reduction per Ignore Pain. Really not good enough. Not good enough at all. So I would say if you're enjoying Protection Warrior, enjoy it while it lasts. The Prot Warrior nerfs have arrived just right on schedule as usual. It's looking dire for Prot Warrior going into the next patch. I'm usually not a doomer, trying not to be a doomer right now, but, when you see a meteor overhead, what do you feel except a sense of doom? And that's really what this is. Then just kind of to add insult to injury, they're making it so that Execute, if you're playing a Colossus Warrior, no longer applies Colossal Might, which is kind of the whole reason you would want to play a Colossus Warrior in the first place. So I feel like Colossus Warrior is just completely dead now. I would not want to play this over Mountain Thane in Raid, certainly not in Mythic Plus. Now, on a more sunny note, they have actually added some new delves and some new flavor to delves, so that's fun. There's going to be a new mount, a new challenge encounter, and you can make Bran Bronzebeard be a tank. Neat. Cool. Now, there are some affix changes. There's also a new achievement. I believe the way that this works is if you hit 2850, then your keystone will never fall below 12 for the rest of the season, even if you brick keys, unless you specifically lower it. That is the way that I am reading this, is that your keystone will always be at least a 12. if you hit 2850. So good for high level players. No real changes for people who just kind of do weekly cash keys. The affixes, for the most part, it seems like they're going to be coming back. I think for the most part they're going to be coming back, but they have kind of unified the various buffs and heals that come out of the affixes into just one consolidated buff that gives both damage and damage reduction to enemies. And then they have actually made a pretty significant upgrade to the Voidbound weekly affix. That is the affix that summons a guy that you have to kill. It has like a shield or whatever. Instead of immediately spawning and giving damage reduction to enemies, it will just cast that damage reduction once the cast ends. So if you kill it before the cast ends, then that's pretty much it. So this is actually a pretty good change for like monks in particular. That guy comes out and he only has 1 health, so you can instantly Todd most of his shield away, and that's actually a pretty good change. I like that a lot. Always found it very irritating when this guy would spawn during like a big boss burn phase. And then I think finally the last real change here is just simply the item effects that do like the meteor damage effect are increased by 100% for their kind of damage on extra targets, so that they will be a little bit better in non-single target situations. All right, now they've also announced all of the class sets, and so I'm just going to briefly take a look at those as well. And so the way that they're kind of doing this is that all of the 2-piece bonuses are the same for each role, and then all the 4-piece bonuses will actually be different per spec. This feels like a time-saving method, but it does actually kind of make it a little bit easier to evaluate all of these bonuses and kind of think about all of these bonuses from class to class, because they're basically the same bonus. And so let's go ahead and start with Blood DK, and their 2-piece bonus is just like all the rest of the takes. Each time you take damage, you have a chance to activate Luck of the Draw, causing you to cast Icebound Fortitude for 4 seconds. And that's going to be the 2-piece for every single tank. You take damage, you have a chance to proc whatever your shield wall is, Icebound Fortitude, Survival Instincts, Fort Brew, etc. It's very brief, it's only like 4 seconds or so, but then for the 8 seconds after it fades, you get a big damage bonus. So you're getting a combination of like a little bit of damage mitigation and a big damage bonus. It is randomly generated, so it's not amazing. It might occur at the end of pulls or when you're not really taking any real damage, but you know, it's okay. Then the 4-piece bonus for Blood is that it has a 2-second longer duration, fine. And more importantly, while it's active, you get 2 less runic power cost on your Death Strike, very irrelevant, who cares at all. And also your Death Strike will cleave to additional nearby enemies. This is insane. Considering how much of your damage right now is Blood in Raid, and I mean in Mythic Plus as well, comes from Death Strike, this is awesome. So I really like this bonus a lot. I was actually kind of prepared to be underwhelmed, but that last line there really saved it from being pretty boring and actually made it pretty good. The ability to get like 3, maybe if you're pooled correctly and you get a lucky proc, 3 Death Strikes that hit 3 targets, that could be pretty good. Obviously doesn't do anything in single target at all. It's pretty terrible in single target, but you know, it's interesting at the very least. In the ideal situation, it could be really good, could also be pretty bad. So I would say they probably need to come up with some sort of protection for single target situations. Maybe it'll do double damage in single target. That would be pretty insane as well. All right, the Vengeance bonus, again, you get Metamorphosis, that same proc as before, and then you have the 4-piece bonus that gives the Hunt a very high chance to refresh its cooldown when you gain Luck of the Draw. What is that high chance? You know, that could be 30%, 50, 75, you know, I don't know exactly. I'd be interested in kind of looking into that, but I have to say, resetting the cooldown of the Hunt, the ability to like hunt and then get a Luck of the Draw proc and then hunt again, that sounds really, really fun. All right, the Bear Druid 4-piece, since the 2-piece is again the same except Survival Instincts instead of Metamorphosis or Icebound Fortitude. The 4-piece bonus is that your next 10 Druid abilities cast another Druid ability at 125% effectiveness. This is just about the weirdest set bonus I think I've ever seen. This is like, it could be anything. You cast Thrash and now it casts, I don't know, Hibernate. I would imagine it's going to be actual healing and damage skills, but it could be like a Moonfire or a Wrath, or it could be a Ferocious Bite. That could be pretty good. It could be a Rejuve on somebody who's on full health. You know, there's very, very weird bonuses. So interesting. Don't know that this really seems all that great. This definitely seemed like the worst one to me. All right, for Brewmaster Monk, the 4-piece bonus is that your next 2 casts of Blackout Kick will deal 150% increased damage and have a much shorter cooldown. This is a bit of rotational complexity that I think could be kind of fun. It's definitely going to be a bit of a concern for energy generation if you are playing kind of a standard Blackout Kick Tiger Palm rotation to just suddenly have to fit into Blackout Kick Tiger Palms in the span of what would normally only be one. You're going to have to find a way to get an extra 25 energy to afford that, but I do like the idea of suddenly having this proc that alters your rotation and gives you a big spike of single target damage. This actually sounds very fun to play with, much more so than like most of these others. And also I noticed that the Fort Brew for Brewmaster is 6 seconds. Everybody else I think has been 4. I just noticed that, thought, that's interesting. All right, Paladin I think is my favorite of all of these. So they get Guardian of Ancient Kings as their 2-piece, and then when they have their 4-piece active, Shield of the Righteous will refund Holy Power 1 to 3 randomly, and then also extend the duration of Luck of the Draw by half a second up to 10. And so that's pretty impressive, the ability to get 10 seconds of that Guardian of Ancient Kings being active, and also 10 seconds of Shield of the Righteous Holy Power refunds. Getting that interaction along with like Divine Purpose procs, those kind of feeding back and forth into each other, just really spamming Shield of the Righteous over and over again. It sounds really, really fun and awesome. It sounds like exactly the opposite of what Blizzard has planned for Protection Warrior, to be honest. And then finally, Protection Warrior finishes things up. It makes it so that Shield Slam's chance to crit is increased by 50% while Luck of the Draw is active. That's fine. And then also those crit chances, or those crit Shield Slams, will reduce the cooldown of Shield Charge by 6 seconds. This sounds really good until you remember that Shield Charge will no longer generate Rage. You're probably not going to be taking the talent that gives that bonus anymore anyway, so really don't feel like Shield Charge is going to be actually doing that much for you under these circumstances. So this actually feels like kind of a real bummer, because this would be a really awesome bonus, but because of the nerfs to Protection Warrior that are happening elsewhere, it actually feels pretty disappointing. And so that is ultimately my takeaway from all of this set of changes. I think some of the Mythic Plus stuff is fine, but pretty conservative, and I'm not, I'm hoping for more on that front, definitely. I think Blood DK and Pally still seem awesome. I think Brewmaster Monk seems like it'll be enjoyable in Raid. But as for Prot Warrior, I hate to be Mr. Doom, but I don't know how you can look at all of these changes to Prot Warrior and not feel exactly that way. Hopefully there's some good news for Prot Warrior coming down the line. Maybe it's just there's a lot of negative feedback and they backpedal on this. That would definitely work for me, because Prot Warrior feels pretty great right now. But either way, thanks for watching. Bye.